Welcome to your BL world. Don't forget to like, comment, and hit the subscription button. Thank you. Let's begin. The night Lionel Hart learned his parents had sold him, he wasn't supposed to be home. He should have been working his evening shift at the bookstore downtown. Instead, a heavy rainstorm had forced the shop to close early. So at 19 years old, soaked from head to toe and carrying a broken umbrella, Lionel returned home hours before anyone expected. It was the worst luck of his life, or perhaps the best. As he quietly entered the house, he heard voices coming from the dining room. His parents, and another man, a stranger. Lionel paused. The atmosphere felt strange, tense, excited, like people discussing something important. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, at least not at first. Then he heard his name. The wedding will take place in 3 weeks. Lionel froze. Wedding? His wedding? His heart immediately began racing. Slowly, he moved closer to the slightly open door. The stranger sitting across from his parents wore an expensive suit. Silver hair, cold eyes, a smile that made Lionel uncomfortable. Beside him rested a leather briefcase. Inside were stacks of documents. And money, a lot of money. "We've already signed our portion," Lionel's father said. The stranger nodded. "Excellent." Lionel felt his stomach twist. "Signed what?" Then his mother spoke. "What happens after Victor receives him is none of our concern." Victor. The name alone made Lionel's blood run cold. Everyone knew Victor Langston, the wealthy businessman with dozens of mansions. The man surrounded by scandals. The man rumors followed everywhere. Stories that made people lower their voices. Stories about beautiful young men disappearing into his estates. Stories about private parties. About guests. About things nobody wanted to describe out loud. Lionel's hands started shaking. No, no, no. His parents couldn't possibly. Once the marriage certificate is finalized, Victor will transfer the remaining payment. Payment. The word shattered whatever hope Lionel still had. Payment. Not dowry. Not support. Payment. As if he were merchandise. Product. Something being bought. The stranger opened the briefcase. Stacks of cash filled the table. Lionel's father smiled. His mother smiled too. And that hurt far more than anything else. Because there wasn't a trace of guilt on either of their faces. Not even a little. "Victor specifically requested Lionel," the stranger said. He was quite pleased when he saw the photographs. Lionel felt sick. Photographs? They had shown him photographs? His mother sighed dramatically. "Honestly, he's been a burden from the day he was born." The word struck harder than a slap. "His medical condition alone caused us enough embarrassment." His father nodded. "At least he'll finally be useful for something." Useful. Useful. Lionel couldn't breathe. For 19 years he had tried. Tried to be a good son. Tried to earn their affection. Tried to make them proud. Every birthday forgotten. Every cruel word. Every punishment. Every moment he convinced himself they still loved him somewhere deep down. Gone. Destroyed. Because now he knew the truth. They never loved him. Not even a little. A tear slipped down his cheek. His mother noticed first. Her eyes widened. The room fell silent. For one brief second, Lionel thought she might look ashamed. Instead she frowned. "Lionel!" His father turned. Their eyes met. And in that moment, Lionel saw something terrifying. Not regret. Not guilt. Only irritation. As if he had interrupted an important meeting. "Come here," his father ordered. Lionel stepped backward, his entire body trembling. The stranger watched him carefully, smiling, studying him, like livestock at an auction. Something inside Lionel snapped. Every survival instinct he possessed screamed one thing: run. Before anyone could stop him, Lionel turned and sprinted. "Lionel!" His father's roar echoed behind him. The front door slammed open. Rain crashed against his face. Cold, sharp, painful. But he didn't stop. He ran. Past houses. Past streetlights. past strangers. His lungs burned. His legs screamed. Still he ran, because for the first time in his life, he finally understood. If he stayed, he wouldn't survive. Hours later, exhausted and shivering beneath an abandoned bus shelter, Lionel counted everything he owned. $500, a backpack, a few clothes, his identification card, and nowhere to go. The rain continued falling. Darkness surrounded him. The future looked terrifying. But one thing was certain. He would rather die on the streets than become Victor Langston's property. 3 days. Lionel had been running for 3 days. By the third day, the $500 that had seemed like a fortune now looked pitiful. A cheap motel had swallowed most of it. Food had taken the rest. And every time he thought he was safe, he found himself looking over his shoulder. Waiting, expecting, terrified, because men like Victor Langston didn't simply accept rejection. And people like Lionel's parents wouldn't hesitate to tell Victor where to find him. The fear followed him everywhere. It sat beside him on buses, walked beside him on crowded streets, curled up next to him whenever he tried to sleep. By the fourth night, Lionel was completely out of money. Completely. Not a single dollar remained. His stomach ached with hunger. His shoes were soaked from walking. His eyes burned from exhaustion. And for the first time since escaping, despair began creeping in. Where was he supposed to go? Who was supposed to help him? He had no relatives, no close friends, no one willing to take him in. The world suddenly felt far larger than it ever had before. And Lionel felt very, very small. The evening air grew colder as darkness settled over the city. Bright lights illuminated the streets. Luxury cars moved through traffic. People laughed. People smiled. People lived normal lives. Meanwhile, Lionel sat alone on a bench trying not to cry. His stomach growled again. Loudly, embarrassingly. He lowered his head. A bitter laugh escaped him. Pathetic. He was pathetic. 19 years old and completely helpless. Eventually his wandering feet carried him into a district he had never visited before. Everything looked expensive, elegant, untouchable. The buildings glittered beneath the city lights. Luxury stores, 5-star hotels, private clubs, places meant for people far richer than Lionel could ever dream of becoming. He didn't belong here, but his feet hurt too much to keep walking. That was how he found himself sitting near the side entrance of one of the largest clubs in the city, a place known as Obsidian. The building towered over the street. Black glass, golden lights, luxury vehicles constantly arriving, important people entering and leaving. Lionel paid little attention. His body simply gave up. He slid down against a wall and hugged his knees, trying to preserve what little warmth remained. The cold was becoming unbearable. For a while he simply sat there, watching his breath fog in the air, watching people pass. Nobody looked at him twice. Nobody stopped. Nobody cared. His eyes began stinging. No, he wasn't going to cry. Not here. Not now. He had promised himself. But tears slipped free anyway. One, then another, rolling silently down pale cheeks. He quickly wiped them away. Still they came, because everything hurt. The betrayal, the fear, the loneliness, the uncertainty. For the first time since running away, Lionel allowed himself to admit something. He was scared, terrified. He didn't know what would happen tomorrow, or tonight, or even the next hour. His body trembled, not entirely from the cold anymore. A sleek black vehicle suddenly turned into the club's private entrance. The luxury car came to a smooth stop. Several security guards immediately straightened. The atmosphere shifted. Employees became alert, respectful, almost nervous. The rear passenger door opened. Long polished shoes touched the ground first. Then a tall figure emerged. Powerful, elegant, dangerous. Ronald Devereux, the owner of Obsidian, the owner of countless businesses. The man whispered about throughout the country. Some called him a businessman. Others called him something far worse. Ronald ignored everyone around him. used to attention, used to fear. His expression remained cold as he adjusted his cufflinks. Another exhausting day. Another list of problems waiting for him upstairs. Another headache. He was already in a terrible mood. Then he noticed movement near the wall. A small figure, curled up, trying desperately not to be seen. One of his guards noticed too. The man immediately frowned. "I'll have him removed." Ronald should have agreed. Normally he would have. Instead his gaze lingered. The figure slowly lifted his head. And everything stopped. Big eyes, red from crying. Messy dark hair. Pale skin. A face so heartbreakingly vulnerable it looked completely out of place in this city. Their eyes met. Just for a second. Lionel immediately looked away. Fear flashing across his face. Ronald frowned. Something unpleasant twisted inside his chest. The boy looked frightened. Not cautious. Not nervous. Frightened. As if expecting punishment. As if expecting to be hurt. The feeling irritated Ronald. For reasons he couldn't understand. The guard stepped forward, ready to force Lionel away. Before he could take another step. "Stop!" The single word froze everyone. The guard blinked. "Boss!" Ronald continued staring at the boy. Lionel looked even smaller up close. His clothes were worn. His hands shook. And despite clearly being exhausted, he still looked ready to run. Like a frightened rabbit cornered by wolves. Ronald's irritation deepened. "Who put that expression on your face?" The thought appeared suddenly. Unexpectedly. Dangerously. Lionel slowly stood. "I'm sorry," he whispered. His voice was soft. Hoarse. "I'll leave." Ronald watched him sway slightly. The boy nearly lost his balance. Hungry. Exhausted. Probably homeless. And somehow Ronald found that fact unacceptable. "What's your name?" The question startled Lionel. He hesitated, as if unsure whether answering was safe. Lionel. The name settled strangely in Ronald's chest. Lionel. Suited him. Ronald stepped closer. The security team exchanged nervous glances. Nobody understood what was happening. Frankly, neither did Ronald. Yet he couldn't walk away. Not this time. Not from this boy. "When was the last time you ate?" Lionel froze. His stomach betrayed him immediately, growling loud enough for everyone to hear. A bright blush spread across his cheeks. Mortification filled his expression. Ronald almost laughed. Almost. Instead he asked again. "When?" "Yesterday." A terrible lie. Even Lionel knew it. Ronald knew it too. For some reason. Seeing the boy try to hide his hunger irritated him even more. "Get in the car." Lionel's eyes widened. "What?" "Get in." Fear immediately appeared. Good. At least the boy had common sense. Most people jumped at opportunities involving Ronald Devereux. This one looked ready to bolt. "I don't." "You're hungry." Ronald interrupted. "You're freezing." Lionel remained silent. "And if I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't need a car to do it." That seemed to surprise him. Ronald wasn't sure why. But after several moments, Lionel finally lowered his gaze. His fingers tightened around his backpack. Then he quietly nodded. The tiniest nod imaginable. Ronald opened the door himself. A gesture so shocking that several bodyguards nearly stopped breathing. Lionel climbed inside. Carefully, like he was afraid the expensive seats might reject him. Ronald followed. The door closed. The drive was silent. Lionel sat stiffly in the corner of the luxurious back seat, clutching his backpack against his chest like it was the only thing keeping him together. He didn't know where Ronald Devereux was taking him. That should have terrified him. Instead, he was too tired to think. Too hungry. Too exhausted. For the first time in days, he was sitting somewhere warm. The heater filled the car with comforting warmth. His freezing fingers slowly began to thaw. Across from him, Ronald sat quietly, watching, not openly, but enough. The boy was even smaller up close. Dark hair, pale skin, red-rimmed eyes. His oversized hoodie practically swallowed him whole. Ronald had seen countless beautiful people before. Models, actors, socialites. None of them had ever held his attention for more than a few seconds. Yet this trembling boy somehow occupied every thought in his head. It was annoying. Ronald disliked being distracted, especially by someone he had met less than 10 minutes ago. Lionel suddenly yawned, then immediately covered his mouth. His eyes widened in embarrassment. Sorry. Ronald stared. The boy apologized for yawning? What kind of life had he been living? The irritation from earlier returned. Stronger this time. Fortunately for everyone involved, Ronald knew exactly where to direct it. Toward whoever had made Lionel this afraid. The car eventually stopped outside a private restaurant. The entire establishment immediately sprang into action. Managers rushed forward. Employees straightened. The owner himself appeared at the entrance. Ronald ignored them all. He stepped out, then glanced back. Lionel was staring at the building. His expression looked alarmed. Is something wrong? Lionel quickly shook his head. No. His stomach growled. Loudly. Ronald heard it. The driver heard it. The security guards heard it. Lionel wanted the ground to open up and swallow him. A laugh escaped Ronald before he could stop it. The sound startled everyone, including Ronald himself. The mafia boss rarely laughed. The staff looked horrified, as if witnessing a supernatural event. Lionel blinked, then stared. For a brief second, Ronald's cold expression had softened. The change was so unexpected that Lionel almost forgot his embarrassment. Come. Ronald turned and walked inside. A few seconds later, Lionel hurried after him. The private dining room was larger than Lionel's entire apartment. His former apartment. He wasn't sure he could call it home anymore. The thought hurt. Ronald noticed his expression darken. You don't like the room? Lionel nearly choked. What? No. Ronald raised an eyebrow. The boy panicked. I mean, it's beautiful. I've just never been somewhere like this before. A tiny smile appeared on Ronald's lips, then vanished. The waiter arrived. What would you like, sir? Before Ronald could answer, Lionel quickly spoke. Just water is fine. The room fell silent. Ronald slowly looked at him. The waiter looked confused. Lionel immediately lowered his head. Water was free. He knew that much. He didn't want Ronald spending money on him. Not after already helping him. Not after everything. Ronald closed the menu. Bring everything. The waiter blinked. Sir. Everything. The waiter practically fled. Lionel stared. You don't have to. I know. The answer came immediately. Simple. Firm. Lionel didn't know how to respond to that. The food arrived 20 minutes later, and Lionel almost cried. Soup, bread, pasta, steak, rice, desserts. More food than he'd ever seen on a single table. For several seconds, he simply stared. Ronald noticed. Eat. Lionel hesitated, then picked up a spoon. One bite, then another, then another. By the fifth bite, his eyes were watering. Ronald frowned. What's wrong? Lionel quickly shook his head. And nothing. A tear slipped down his cheek. It just tastes really good. Ronald's chest tightened. The boy wasn't crying because the food was bad. He was crying because someone had fed him. Something dangerous stirred inside him. Possessive, protective, violent. Whoever had done this to Lionel would pay. Ronald didn't know who they were yet, but they would. Across the table, Lionel continued eating, completely unaware. For the first time in days, his stomach no longer hurt. For the first time in days, he felt warm, safe. And for the first time in years, someone was looking at him as though he mattered. Not as a burden, not as a problem, not as something to sell. Just Lionel. Neither of them knew it yet. But this dinner would be the beginning of everything. Because while Lionel thought Ronald had simply shown him kindness, Ronald was already making a decision. A dangerous one. Ronald made his decision before the dinner was even over. Lionel simply didn't know it yet. The boy was still eating carefully, as though afraid the food might disappear if he moved too fast. Every now and then he would glance up, meet Ronald's gaze, then quickly look away, as if eye contact itself was dangerous. Ronald hated that, not because it offended him, because somebody had taught Lionel to fear, and Ronald wanted names. After another few minutes, he set down his glass. "Who are you running from?" The spoon in Lionel's hand froze. Immediately, the change was obvious. His shoulders stiffened. The color drained from his face. Fear. Pure fear. Interesting. Ronald remained silent, allowing the boy time. Lionel stared at the untouched dessert in front of him. A beautiful chocolate cake. 5 minutes ago he had looked excited about it. Now he looked sick. "You don't have to tell me." The relief that flashed across Lionel's face was immediate. Then guilt followed, as if he felt bad for keeping secrets. The boy wore every emotion openly. Ronald found that oddly refreshing. Most people lied. Most people hid things. Lionel couldn't hide his feelings if his life depended on it. Unfortunately, after several moments, the boy spoke anyway. "My parents." Ronald's eyes narrowed. Lionel lowered his gaze. "They wanted me to get married. That wasn't unusual. The world was full of arranged marriages." But the fear in Lionel's voice suggested something much darker. "I didn't want to." Ronald waited. "My father said I didn't have a choice." The boy's fingers tightened around his spoon. "They already signed everything." Everything. Interesting wording. Not agreed. Not arranged. Signed. Like a transaction. Like a contract. A bad feeling settled in Ronald's chest. "Who was the groom?" Silence. A long silence. Then Lionel whispered a name. "Victor Langston." For the first time that evening, Ronald's expression changed. Only slightly, but it changed. Lionel noticed. His heart sank. Of course, everyone knew Victor. Maybe Ronald did business with him. Maybe they were friends. Maybe Ronald would hand him over. The fear returned instantly. "I ran away." The words spilled out before he could stop them. "I know I shouldn't have." "You absolutely should have." Lionel blinked. His head snapped upward. Ronald's face was cold. Dangerously cold. Not toward Lionel. Toward someone else. Someone absent from the room. "What?" "You should have run." The certainty in Ronald's voice stunned him. Lionel had expected criticism. Disappointment. Anything. Not this. Ronald leaned back slightly. Victor Langston. Now everything made sense. The fear. The exhaustion. The desperation. Victor wasn't merely a wealthy businessman. The public knew him as an eccentric billionaire. Ronald knew the truth. Victor collected people. Not literally, at least not on paper. But everyone in certain circles knew. Young men, young women, beautiful people, people who couldn't fight back, people who disappeared behind mansion walls. There were rumors, too many rumors, and where there was smoke, there was usually fire. Ronald had disliked Victor for years. Now he disliked him even more. "What did your parents receive?" Lionel swallowed. "A lot of money." Ronald wasn't surprised. "How much?" Lionel quietly named the amount. The room went silent. Ronald nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, because that was the amount Victor usually spent on luxury watches. A human life, sold for less than a watch. How pathetic. How disgusting. And Lionel's parents had accepted. Something dark stirred beneath Ronald's calm exterior. Very dark. Unfortunately for Victor and the Hart family, Ronald wasn't known for mercy. A soft knock interrupted them. One of Ronald's men entered. "Boss." The man stopped. His eyes briefly landed on Lionel, then immediately looked away. "Smart. What is it?" "The meeting has been moved to tomorrow." Ronald nodded. The man hesitated, clearly wanting to say something else. Finally he spoke. "Mr. Langston has been calling." Lionel's face turned white. Ronald noticed instantly. "Interesting. Very interesting." The employee continued. "He says it's urgent." Ronald's gaze became icy. Did I ask? No, boss. Then stop answering. The man immediately nodded. Yes, boss. And left. The room fell silent again. Lionel stared. Victor had called Ronald? Personally? Why? Unless he knows you. The words slipped out before Lionel could stop them. Ronald looked amused. A little. That was an understatement. The two men had competed in business for years. Victor hated losing. Ronald rarely lost. It was a difficult relationship. Lionel's stomach dropped. If Ronald and Victor knew each other, wouldn't that make things worse? The fear must have shown on his face. Because Ronald suddenly sighed. A surprisingly human sound. Then he asked, "Do you think I'm going to hand you over?" Lionel froze. The question had been spoken so casually. Yet it hit the center of every fear he possessed. Because yes, part of him believed exactly that. Why wouldn't he? People always chose money. Always. His parents had. Others would too. Ronald watched the hesitation and understood everything. Slowly, very slowly, he stood. The movement made Lionel nervous. Ronald walked toward the massive windows overlooking the city. The lights stretched endlessly below, the entire city glittering in the darkness. Then he spoke, without turning around. Victor Langston made a mistake. Lionel frowned. What mistake? Ronald's voice became colder, sharper, more dangerous. He assumed I cared about what he wants. Something about those words made the air feel heavier. For the first time since meeting Ronald, Lionel felt it. The power, not wealth, not influence, power, raw and absolute. The kind that couldn't be bought. The kind that made grown men obey without question. Ronald finally turned. His eyes settled on Lionel. Steady, certain, terrifying, yet somehow reassuring. Then he said the words that would change everything. "You are safe here." Lionel stared. Ronald continued. "No one is taking you." The certainty broke something inside Lionel. Not in a bad way. In a way that hurt. Because nobody had ever promised him safety before. Nobody. His vision blurred. Tear escaped. Then another. Ronald sighed. There he goes again. Crying. The boy cried like rain. And somehow Ronald found it impossible to look away. Across the room, Lionel hurriedly wiped his eyes. Embarrassed. But Ronald's attention had already shifted elsewhere. Toward Victor. Toward the parents. Toward every person responsible for putting that fear inside Lionel. For now, he would let them breathe. For now. But not forever. Because Ronald Devereux had just decided something. Lionel Hart belonged nowhere near monsters like Victor Langston. And anyone who disagreed was welcome to test their luck. The next morning, Lionel woke up convinced he was dreaming. The bed alone was larger than his entire bedroom back home. Not that he wanted to think about home. The thought immediately soured his mood. For several seconds, he simply stared at the ceiling, waiting for reality to catch up, waiting to wake up in some alley, waiting to discover Ronald Devereux had changed his mind. Nothing happened. The room remained warm, safe, quiet. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Lionel immediately sat upright. "Come in." The door opened. A woman dressed in a neat black uniform entered. She smiled kindly. "Good morning, Mr. Hart." Lionel nearly fell out of bed. "And Mr. Hart?" The woman looked confused. Yes. Nobody had ever addressed him like that before. Certainly not in a place like this. The woman introduced herself as Martha, the head housekeeper. She informed him breakfast was ready whenever he wished. Then she left. Just like that. No insults. No judgment. No orders. Lionel sat there staring at the closed door. His eyes suddenly burned. He hated how easily he cried. Unfortunately, life had given him many reasons. Half an hour later, he nervously entered the dining room and immediately froze. Ronald was already there, reading reports, drinking coffee, looking exactly as intimidating as Lionel remembered. The older man glanced up. Their eyes met. Good morning. Lionel blinked. A second passed. Then another. Ronald raised an eyebrow. Did you forget how to speak overnight? The teasing caught Lionel completely off guard. A small laugh escaped him. The sound surprised both of them. Ronald stared. Lionel immediately became embarrassed. The laugh disappeared, but Ronald had already heard it and decided he liked the sound very much. Breakfast continued peacefully until Ronald's phone rang. The atmosphere changed instantly. Not visibly, but Lionel felt it. The temperature seemed to drop. Ronald answered, listened, then sighed. How many? A pause. I see. Another pause. Then Ronald's expression darkened. Tell them no. Silence. Then, I don't care what he offered. Click. The call ended. Lionel quietly poked at his food, trying not to be curious. Failing miserably. Ronald noticed. Ask. What? The question. Lionel nearly choked. I wasn't. You were. A pause. Then Lionel gave up. Was it Victor? Ronald's expression said enough. It was. Lionel's stomach twisted. Ronald calmly picked up his coffee. Apparently he's becoming impatient. The words were spoken casually. Too casually. As if discussing annoying weather. Lionel couldn't understand it. Victor Langston was terrifying. Powerful. Influential. The kind of man who could ruin lives with a phone call. Yet Ronald talked about him like an inconvenience. A fly. Nothing more. The difference between the two men suddenly became very clear. And that realization should have comforted Lionel. Instead, it made him curious. Who exactly was Ronald Devereux? Because nobody treated Victor Langston this lightly. Nobody. Not unless they had even more power. The thought lingered in his mind throughout the day. Especially when Ronald left for work. The mansion became quieter afterward. Lionel spent hours wandering. The property was enormous. Gardens, pools, private lounges, a library bigger than his old-school library. Everything looked expensive, untouchable, yet nobody stopped him from exploring. Nobody treated him like an intruder. For the first time in years, he felt something strange. Peace. Unfortunately, peace never lasted. 3 days later, trouble arrived. Lionel had just finished helping Martha arrange flowers. Something he insisted on doing despite not needing to. When the front gates suddenly opened, a black luxury vehicle entered. Then another, and another. The atmosphere inside the mansion immediately changed. Security became alert. Employees became tense. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Curious, Lionel stepped toward a nearby window, then froze. His blood turned cold. A familiar figure stepped out of the lead vehicle. Silver hair, expensive suit, cruel smile. Victor Langston. Lionel stopped breathing. No, no, no. How had he found him? Panic exploded inside his chest. His hands began shaking. The flower vase slipped from his fingers. Crash. Shattered glass covered the floor. Several employees turned. But Lionel didn't notice. Because Victor was here. Victor was here. And Ronald wasn't. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, true fear returned. Meanwhile, outside, Victor adjusted his suit jacket. His confidence remained intact. After all, he had spent decades getting whatever he wanted. And he wanted Lionel. Ronald's refusal had been annoying. Nothing more. Today he intended to solve the problem personally. The mansion doors opened. One of Ronald's senior men stepped outside. A massive scar crossed his neck. His expression remained blank. Victor smiled. I'd like to see Ronald. The man stared, then replied, Boss is busy. Victor's smile twitched. Then I'll wait. No. Victor's eyes narrowed. The scarred man remained completely indifferent. As I said, his voice was calm, cold, dangerous. Boss is busy. For the first time, irritation appeared on Victor's face. He wasn't accustomed to being dismissed. Certainly not by an employee. Unfortunately for him, he still didn't understand something. The man standing before him wasn't Ronald's employee. Not really. He was one of Ronald's enforcers. A man with enough blood on his hands to make ordinary criminals faint. And unlike businessmen, men like him didn't care about money, or status, or influence. Victor took a step forward. The scarred man smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile, not even close. And suddenly Victor felt something, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Unease. For the first time since arriving, he wondered if perhaps he had misjudged Ronald Devereux. Inside the mansion, Lionel remained frozen by the window, watching, terrified, unaware that this was the beginning of Victor's worst mistake. Because while Victor believed he was confronting a rival businessman, he was actually knocking on the door of a kingdom far darker than he could imagine. And Ronald Devereux had finally run out of patience. End of part 1.